If you don't know Rouven Heck, he's a legend in this space. He's been around for quite a bit, works for Consensus. He's also the managing director for the Identity Foundation, and there's 100 companies, including Microsoft, involved in that. We're not going to be talking about identity tonight. We're actually going to be talking about scaling problems. And I've been in this space for almost 9 years now. How long has it been for you? You gotta hold the button down for a little bit, turn that guy on. Yeah, 2013, so about the same time. I got involved in January. And so I'm really, really excited to have Rouven up here. This is a big deal because Rouven's kind of shy. He's kind of like my wife in that he doesn't like big crowds, but he cares about you guys so much that he's out here to talk about what he's passionate about, a lot of this stuff. And it matters to all of us. How many of you have ever done a DeFi transaction in your life? All right, so we got about, probably more than half the crowd. How many people really were frustrated with the gas fees you had to pay? All right, the same hands are up. Okay, that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. The scaling problems with this industry, the different ways it impacts us, our ability to deliver on the promises we were making in 2013 about peer-to-peer digital cash, money for the unbanked, this new internet that's private and secure with a fundamental payment layer. These are all things that we were really excited about. And I know myself, I'm a little frustrated because I haven't been able to deliver on that promise. So Rouven, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, give a little background of what you're doing here tonight, and we're going to have a great conversation. We are going to go a little technical. I know a lot of people in the crowd here aren't as technical, but I'm going to try to keep it fun and interesting because this stuff matters. When you talk to people who have done very, very well in this space, and a lot of them are very rich now, it's because they did their research. They actually understand the tech. They'll sometimes pretend that they don't, but they really do. So if you want to be among them, I would suggest listening, writing notes down in your phone about these terms you're going to hear that you have no idea what they mean, and go research, because it's really important. So go ahead, Rouven, introduce yourself.
Cool, thank you so much. So yeah, my name is Rouven. I have a technical background. I worked for a big bank for many years. I'm German, and I moved here a year ago, so I'm quite excited to be part of the community. And my expertise is actually identity and decentralized or self-sovereign identity, which is like one big part where we use public blockchains. So not only DeFi and assets, but there are other use cases which are quite exciting. But being part of the Ethereum community for many years and the broader space, there's a lot of infighting of this is better than this. And I listened last week here when Sean spoke about Polkadot, and he used a lot of but Ethereum, da 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 da. So I'm here to at least try to explain a bit more what are trade-offs, what are the objectives of what we started with, and why there's a philosophical value on decentralization for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and others. And on the other side, then talk about the challenges, why we haven't solved it yet, what happens in the industry today, with gas fees and alternative options out there, and then maybe go a bit deeper in what are the most promising solutions which are coming now or already live now, and what are the challenges around them, and then talk about adoption and so on.
I'm super excited about this. I even just in the pre-discussion we were having, and I know the mic sometimes can be funky, so what I do is pin it to my chin, and that way, if I move my head around, it sticks with me, and that works out well. But I learned, for example, how many have heard of Ethereum 2.0? And you've been hearing that for how many years now, that Ethereum 2.0 is going to launch? Well, I just learned something tonight, just chatting with Rouven, that's not even really a thing anymore. So we're going to learn about that tonight as well.
And that's not a bad thing, it's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a good thing. So, yeah, why don't you start us off with, again, what we're going to be talking about tonight is scalability, the problems in the space, the solutions that you guys are considering and many other are considering. We're going to talk about the trade-offs of, security, performance, decentralization, and we're going to get into the details of that. And then at the end, we're going to kind of make this a little more practical too, talk about the things you've heard of like Binance Smart Chain or Solana or Polkadot or whatever, different solutions and the different approaches that the different networks are taking to solve these problems. I think it's going to be a good conversation. Hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end.
Yeah, and please keep it interactive. I'm very interested to have a lot of questions, and so we can discuss. So I think starting with what's the core direction of what we wanted to achieve with Bitcoin and Ethereum is we want to build systems which move the trust from institutions, banks, governments, or corporations to a network of in this decentralized manner that we can trust. So it's moving basically trust from institutions to math and economics. So that's very important.
It's
So-
extremely important historically because we've really never had this tool as a species. It's always been like whoever's got the biggest aircraft carrier, whoever's got the most guns, they get to like manufacture consent and tell everyone who you have to deal with in order to control and store your own value. Now we have math and physics in the driver's seat. It's pretty exciting.
Yes, and so to use these technologies, we need to have, like there's a certain core principles we try to adhere to, and one of them is like really decentralization and security. So some use cases, people argue, why do we even use a blockchain, just use a database, or like for a game, why is it important? So it depends on the use case, so there is no like silver bullet that this is the answer for everything, but the values and the systems we wanted to, or what people with Bitcoin want to build, as well as with Ethereum, is something which is strong enough, resilient enough to resist if staked actors go after it. So that means if China bans it, or if other states or the other institutions want to fight it, that it's strong enough. And so decentralization is one of the most important values we have. Is what it means is that we don't need to trust any other party. Anyone can install this software on the computer and is part of the network. Because if we move away from decentralization, and it's often like, oh, who cares about decentralization? That's what you hear all the time in our space, like, oh, it's much faster and cheaper. Who gives a whatever about decentralization? It's all about building a resilient network, which is strong to resist censorship, as well as that anyone can take it over, anyone.
To put that in context, let's imagine for a second that you run the Federal Reserve and you can print money out of nothing. You can literally print trillions of dollars out of nothing. And along comes an actor in this space that can threaten your ability to create trillions of dollars out of nothing. One of the ways you might, and we talked about this on bitcointalk.org back in 2013, the early Bitcoin community talked about, why does this matter? Why does what we're doing matter? Because if you can just give people a bunch of money, for example, buy them off, and say, look, your shitcoin, your whatever is worth a whole lot of US dollar fiat money. Just focus on that, pay attention on that. You would probably do that, right? You have the ability to print money out of nothing. You can pump a token price to whatever you want, and you can get people to sacrifice their core principles, sacrifice their fundamental belief systems of why this stuff matters, and then you get to stay in control. And if you look at the history of wars and all this, there's a great documentary called All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. They make a lot of money off of wars. So there's a way to think about this that from a moral perspective, from an ethical perspective, that's kind of the position I've taken for a long time, is that this stuff matters because I want to create a world that we all want to live in. I want a better place for my kids. So when we talk about decentralization, we talk about these things being distributed systems that are really resistant to nation state level attacks. Again, this is a tool we've never had as a species before, and it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. So today we achieve this typically with Bitcoin and most of the other blockchains by natively repeating everything which was happened before. So if you install your Bitcoin or Ethereum node, it downloads all the transactions and just computes them one by one. So you don't need to trust anyone else because your computer can do the work, and now you can know you can trust this network. So that's great, but it's not very efficient. And so the problem is if many people want to use your system and you have a very, let's say, constrained demand in terms of block space, and now it gets a bit more technical, like how much capacity has a blockchain. If many people want to use it, then we have this in spikes with Bitcoin, and that we have this since a year and a half now with Ethereum, that many people make a lot of money with DeFi, NFTs, you name it, and so many people are very willing to pay a lot of money to be part of these transactions.
And this is my number one critique in the space right now. It's become a rich person's only club, whereas I got involved because it was peer-to-peer digital cash money for the unbanked. So I take personal issue, and Rouven and I, for many, many months, we go back and forth about the fees that my team has to pay. For example, the FIO protocol has to pay when we pay our team in USDT on Ethereum because we pay high fees, and it's pretty frustrating.
No, totally, and I think nobody tries to explain or say it's not a problem. So it's like surcharges. When COVID hit and there were barely anyone driving around, and Uber was like $30 to go from the airport to San Juan, it was like crap, but people were willing to pay for it. So it's basically permanent surcharges at the moment on this, but it keeps the system safe. So we could make trade-offs, and I think that's now generally one of the challenges is that we have this trilemma. So you can either optimize for always for 2 out of 3 things. So it's either you have security, decentralization, or scalability. And the Bitcoin and the Ethereum community is always decentralization and security is more important because Over time, we will be more scalable because there's lots of innovation, and we'll talk about some of them today. But really giving up decentralization, it's very hard to get it back. So once you're centralized, telling them whoever is in power of a centralized power to say, now give it up, please give power to everybody else, that typically happens in revolutions, and people will, I don't know, die.
Historically, it's not a good thing, so you want to avoid it.
So these trade-offs is something we just like have, yeah? That's like where the place where we're in today. And these constraints are typically just very technical things. So we have computers. Computers can only compute so much. And there's bandwidth, which is another constraint. And if you want to build a system, and storage is like the third one, and if you build now a system and you want to make it decentralized, that means you need to be able to buy a computer and put it to the network, and you're part of like validating it. So you don't need to trust whatever your local bank to run this computer for you, or your local whatever internet provider, because otherwise you just create something, because then they get acquired from the next one, and you build bigger and bigger banks or institutions, and you're back to like where we are today. So decentralization is critical. So now, when we talk about these trade-offs, like sure, we can double the size of one of these blocks. So like in Bitcoin, it's a megabyte, and Ethereum, it's a bit more complicated, but let's say there's a chunk of transactions per block. So there's some computation which needs to happen, there's some like memory which needs to be doing, and then you need to store it. And if you play around with these kind of like parameters, it changes whether over time you can continue to use a normal PC which a normal person can buy and run. The second element is if you build bigger blocks and you want to ship them around, we have like this constraint of speed of light, and we have other constraints which are very hard to overcome. So like shipping this kind of blocks around the world, assuming now you make them really big, and they can only like travel very fast within the United States, but are very slow to get across the ocean, suddenly you have the risk that the network is creating local hotspots and creates forks, and that decreases the security. So these are like really like core parameters which are trade-offs, and they're really hard to overcome.
Yeah, I want to unpack that a little bit more. So the whole point of a blockchain is I call it global non-violent consensus. It's a truth oracle for the entire world that everyone agrees to at the same time. It's a database and a network, connected together in a way that can't be separated. So when I send a transaction to someone anywhere in the world, everywhere in the world, people agree that transaction happened, and it's immutable, can't be modified, can't be disputed. The challenge that you get, as we're describing, is how do you do that at scale? The Bitcoin is 7 transactions a second. What's Ethereum?
I think we stopped counting this way, because what does it mean? There's different transactions. Transaction of just moving money is a lot of them. Yeah. If you make complicated smart contract swaps,
NFT minting, and
that's why it's like
DeFi. Yeah.
We stopped using.
That makes sense, but we can all say it's not that many.
Yes.
It's certainly not,
totally.
It's certainly not the 60,000 transactions a second you need to be PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, Union Pay. It's nowhere close. Right, and so these are the problems when we talk about scaling. We talk about we're the new solution for the financial industry of the world, and we can't even come close. That's a big problem. And if you make these trade-offs and you say, well, okay, we're going to just use really big blocks, or we're going to do this, that, and the other, you run into the physical limitations of the internet speed to get that information to the other side of the world, and you have these network forks, these network fragmentations that can be a very serious problem. I'll just tell a quick story. In 2013, I was sitting there around 1, 2 in the morning, and there was a fork in the Bitcoin network. And it was May. My wife Green's in the crowd here. She remembers it was like really late at night. We're sitting there, and I'm watching as this fork is happening. Somebody rolled out a new version of the Bitcoin Core, and some wallets adopted it, some didn't. And you had this situation where there was 2 different versions of truth. One blockchain accepted a specific block, and one version didn't, because one upgraded to the new protocol, some didn't. And you had this situation where it was like there was 2 versions of truth, which breaks the entire point of a blockchain. Yeah. And it was a very serious issue, and what was exciting about it is I got to see people all around the world that was on IRC watching it happen in real time as they shut down their businesses, they shut down their exchanges, they turned off their wallets, and they said, let's fix this issue. They were each selfishly motivated to solve a problem that was in the best interest of the entire network, which is really amazing. I've never seen governments do that. I've never seen nonprofits do that. I've never seen corporations do that. And I told my wife, I went to bed at like 2 a.m. and I was like, this is going to change the world. So it's super important to have that consensus and not make compromises that make that fragile, which would be, you'd lose resilience if you have this situation where people couldn't agree around the world on what is truth.
So now that we talked about like the philosophical value stuff, we can be a bit more practical. So these are all trade-offs. Yeah, I mentioned that. So what we have seen, because high gas costs, it's super cool. If you haven't done it, play around. It's like nice, but it's so expensive that I cannot even recommend my friends to play around because it's cost prohibitive. So what we have seen in the last, 12 months is that many other blockchains, like other Ethereum layer ones, have started. Basically, they just took Ethereum, the code, and just deployed it in a different environment. So we have Polygon, they have changed to proof of stake and have just changed some of these parameters. Or one of the big ones was Binance Smart Chain. So it's Ethereum, they run it only with 20 nodes.
Real quick, I'm curious, how many people have used Binance Smart Chain and done a DeFi? Wow, I mean, a little bit less, but almost the same number of hands. That's impressive. So you've done a DeFi transaction or something on Binance Smart Chain. And was that because of the fees? Mostly, yeah. Was it because like you're sitting there going, well, 20 nodes or thousands of Ethereum nodes, whatever, I'm making money, who cares?
Yeah.
Right? Well, when this conversation is over, you might understand a little bit more about why you might want to care.
So I think the point is like, in a time when you move $1,000 in there and you can make like 10,000 APY, who the fuck cares? You just do this and then you move it out. So I think there is lots of these like opportunities where people just go in. There's a lot of incentive programs to attract people by basically printing your token, give it out, make people rich, and then they leave. And we will see this because many of these incentive programs are running out at some point, and people are just moving to the next one. So now everybody moves to Avalanche. Next one is who knows. So there's all these like different chains, and it was so easy because it was just the same code. Your Uniswap, you just call it differently, deploy it on a different blockchain, and suddenly you make money. So it just like basically people were chasing where was the next best way to make money. It was not philosophically, it was not really relevant because you just use it for a few months and then you just go. So we see this. So these are like trade-offs where, for example, with Binance Smart Chain, I think it's 10x the capacity. The problem is if you do 2 or 3x the size of the blocks and you 2 or 3 times like more often produce blocks, suddenly you have a big storage problem because now suddenly your blockchain is not like growing slowly but exponentially. And so a few months later they actually had like suddenly problems, or capacity doesn't work anymore, they need to increase fees because suddenly the cost goes up and the demand goes up, and suddenly what do? You increase the cost. And that's what we see on all these different blockchains. Once they become popular and kind of people want to use it, it's not free forever. So that's kind of where we are. Then there's the non-Ethereum alternatives, where you see Solana and others who are like at the moment quite hyped, and they just make very different trade-offs. Like Solana is not hiding that they have the top-notch biggest servers in the world to run, and a much more centralized solution, which is much faster and therefore much cheaper, and people like it and they use it, and that's fine. But it does not fulfill the desire of like building a system which is resilient and long-term, used for the services we have in mind. So if people want to use it and like, okay, I just need to use it for like a day or two, play my game, do my thing, and then move my money back, that's fine.
So to give some more context as well, for 10 years I ran an e-commerce company called FoxyCart. And so I was really involved in the payment space, the traditional payment space. I started that in 2007 with my business partner. And in that experience, I learned about the entire financial process as it is today. You've got the credit card companies, you've got the acquirers, it was only like a dozen or so when we first started getting involved. You've got the payment gateways, you've got the merchant account providers, and then you've got, of course, the banks. And your actual relationship with the bank, so they send you a card. And that whole structure, all this hierarchy, all these people taking fees, taking a cut. When I started looking at some of the different scaling solutions, including Lightning Network and some of these, it started to look like a similar hub and spoke model where it's like we're all coming to these central points that we all have to have permission from, essentially, in order to transact. So when I start hearing these stories about how the industry that I got so excited about is a tool for freedom, a tool for individuals to own and control their own store of value, transitioning slowly over time, like the frog in the water being boiled, to these systems we were trying to disrupt is very concerning. And when I hear about these massive servers that you have to run, a gigantic data center to be able to run a node, I start to think, wow, this looks a lot similar to the industry I thought we were disrupting, and that's concerning.
Yeah. So let's talk about what are the better scaling options out there. And one of the big ones, which many people talk about, is called sharding. And that's basically what last week Sean from Polkadot was here, which in my mind is that you have a relay chain, which is kind of like your backend, and then you have multiple parachains. These are like shards. And the whole idea is if you have 1,000 computers doing the validation stuff, now you can say, hey, I don't need actually 1,000. It's enough if we have, let's say, 100. And so we create 10 shards, and it's always 100 validators per shard. And so as long as you change who's validating your blockchain on a regular basis and keep it kind of random, then you achieve pretty high security with the decentralization and much, much more throughput.
An example of that, if your last name is M or further in the alphabet, raise your hand. All right, if your last name is A up to M, raise your hand. It's going to be the opposite group, right? That's an example of sharding. So you'd have one group that would process a certain number of transactions, you'd have another group that processes a different set of transactions, and you're never going to have a transaction accidentally be processed by the same group. It's sharded to different groups.
Yeah, so, and that's a really powerful thing. We will see this more and more, and also Ethereum 2, when we used the term Ethereum 2, was about multiple shards. We talked about 64 basically parallel Ethereums with one backend blockchain to make sure that they all behave correctly and so on. That has changed. At least temporarily, we are prioritizing this rollup, and that's what we talk about today. But I want to explain there's one more other thing which people are using, which is called state channels, and it's a concept which more between two parties. So similar to the Lightning Network, is you basically put a deposit on your layer 1 blockchain, take the money out, and then you just interact with someone offline. So many people use the analogy with the bar tab. You open a tab, basically put a deposit, which is usually just your credit card, and then you just use it, you go and spend, drink, and at the end you close. And that's basically the one settlement which is actually seen from the network. So Visa doesn't know how many drinks you had and how often you used it, but basically there's this trust that you can always close the tab with this credit card, and that's cool. Many people now compare this with you can have Venmo. You need to move first money into Venmo, then you just move it around. The problem is that the state channels are not as capital efficient, because typically you need to open a channel with each party. And that's the challenge. If you would have a Venmo balance for each person you want to interact with, it's kind of annoying because you hold a lot of money on your Venmo account. And that's kind of the critique with state channels.
That and the hub and spoke model, where it's well, I'm not going to have a channel with you and the bartender and everyone else, but I'll probably have a channel with Binance and Coinbase and some of these bigger platforms that every other person is going to have a channel with. And then through those kind of shared channels, we can always know that a transaction is going to route correctly. But again, that creates a point of centralization that concerns me.
Yeah. So the most promising, and that's kind of also the title, is this layer 2 technology. So state channels is one of them. But the more promising ones are two, which we call roll-ups, and they're two different designs. So remember, for your blockchain to be secure, you need to replicate every transaction. And with state channels, you have the challenge that you put a deposit, but then you have the challenge that you can just transact with one person. So the idea here is that a lot of the heavy effort what a blockchain needs to do the validation is actually taking every transaction, checking that the person who's sending and receiving is correct, and that the signature, basically the way how they sign it, that they prove that they're actually in possession of the tokens or the Bitcoin or whatever it is. That's a very compute heavy effort. And the idea is now you can have one single computer where you can send your 1,000 transactions. This computer is doing all the computation, does all the validation, and then it uploads the results to the Ethereum, let's say, layer 1, the main blockchain. And so there are two different now models how this can work. So the model one is...
Before we get to the model, I want to make sure we touch on that a little bit. So the computation has to happen. It's the entire point of how this all works. And you provably demonstrate that if I've got 500 tokens, I can't send 500 to Nehemia, 500 to Karine, and 500 to someone else because I only have 500. As soon as I send 500 to one person and then I try to send 500 more to Rouven, the calculations that the individual nodes are doing, this is literally like software running on someone's computer, says, no, that's invalid. And they all run the same rules, so they all agree that's invalid. That transaction is fraudulent. It never makes it into the blockchain. It never becomes part of the ledger, the truth consensus. So this is really important. It's really computationally heavy. But if there's a way to prove that calculation was done and done correctly in a way that everyone can verify very, very easily without actually doing all the complicated computation, that's obviously extremely efficient and a much better way to go. That's what we're going to get into.
Yes. So as I mentioned in the beginning, like the whole network works on math, which is like crypto or cryptographic primitives, as well as economics. So there's an incentive for people to run a node because you get some bitcoins or some ether. And so that's kind of the core primitives we have. And now with these rollups, we have like two options. We can either have whoever is operating and do the calculation and uploading them. They put some stake up, means they need to put some ether into a smart contract on the Bitcoin, on the Ethereum blockchain. And then you have anyone or like who can see this, basically audits this block. And if there's a mistake, then anyone can go to the blockchain, to Ethereum, and say like, hey, there was a fraudulent transaction in there which is incorrect. And by submitting a fraud proof, they now receive, like, the A will be fixed, B, the person who's submitting the fraudulent transaction get penalized by taking some of the ETH away, and the person who found it will get some ETH.
And this is called slashing as well.
So that's slashing. And that's kind of what we call optimistic rollup. So think about this way, like someone writes you a check and you're optimistically taking it, go to the bank and you think it's all good, or I don't know, we submit our taxes, and if you would know that everyone get audited every time through a computer, so it's very, very easy to validate that everybody's correct, but optimistically you do this, you submit, and then there's like a few days until people have the chance to submit a fraud proof. And that's kind of like model one, which is already like live now. We have the first layer two, like Optimism and Arbitrum and others are building this now or are live. You can use Uniswap already on Optimism and Arbitrum as an example.
And let's talk about that a little bit before we go to the next one. So I want to make sure we understand this, because I've heard these terms so many times. Optimistic rollup, and it's like, jargon. I don't know what that means. You've done a really good job of explaining what that means. It's that we're optimistic that everybody's playing by the rules, and if somebody isn't playing by the rules, we have an economic incentive to catch them at it. And that kind of the whole reason the Bitcoin network works. And every time you hear somebody talk about, well, I like blockchain technology, but I don't really like cryptocurrency, well, then they don't fundamentally understand how it works. Because the reward of cryptocurrency, the value of that, given to the validators, the block producers, the people who secure the network, is the reason why that ledger is immutable and secure. It's the reason why it has any value at all. So if you take that same concept of an economic incentive securing the network and just apply it on multiple layers, which is kind of what this is doing, you could say, well, I'm optimistic that this is going to be good, but if it's not, I know there are people who are selfishly motivated to make some money that are going to be out there going, I could check some of these transactions once in a while, and they could do it whenever. It doesn't have to be in real time. The second you hit click a button to do a DeFi transaction, it could be a little bit later, and that transaction is still going to go through. You're fine, but the guy who fraudulently tried to deceive the system, he's going to lose their stake, or she's going to lose their stake. And everyone's going to be happy about it because they were cool, the guy who found the problem is cool, and the bad guy got screwed. We all like that.
Yes. So that's kind of like, that's model one, which is already like working and it's pretty cool, but it only reduced at the moment maybe by 30x the transaction cost. So, I mean, only 30x, it's like, it's not too bad, but it's...
That'd be like instead of $30, it's $1, right?
Yeah. So at the moment it's more like a Uniswap, it's like 150, and so it's 30, it's still not good enough. Sorry, that was wrong. Like it's still like
it's an improvement though.
Yes,
it's $160 generally in the last week or two that I've checked to do a Uniswap DeFi transaction.
Yeah. But let's say so that's like one model which works, and the reason why this is quite attractive is like people use basically the same smart contract and just deploy it there. people need to move crypto in there. It's like an own blockchain, if you think about this, but it runs and you just uploaded it, and so you have all the security and all the guarantees from this decentralized network. So if something goes wrong in there, you can always, as someone who has money in this, let's say, layer 2 blockchain, you can always send a transaction to Ethereum and say like, hey, whatever, Luke is operating this weird thing and something is wrong, I can always go back to Ethereum and say, like, I want my money out. So there's no security degradation by doing this.
That's really important. So like, I remember back in like the BitShares days where we were doing a lot of this DeFi stuff before it was cool and had a name like DeFi. But there were these gateways that you had to kind of trust. And they were running a gateway for this DeFi exchange. And I could take my tokens, put them into this gateway, and they would give me a version of that token that I could then trade in a decentralized way and provably on chain so we could all agree that everything happened. And then I would go back to that gateway to get the real original token back out. But there was this central point of the gateway that I had to trust. And if I'm understanding you correctly, the gateway is the chain you already trust anyway. Like it's the layer 1 that I can go into and out of. Yeah. Is that correct?
So the gateway is protected by layer 1. So there's no worry that something is happening because it's a smart contract on Ethereum. And that's maybe just like disclaimer to like everybody who thinks, oh, it's so cool, like just move money from like Ethereum to Binance Smart Chain. This bridge is really not secure. Like there are two different ways how these bridges are secured. Is either there's an economic incentive that whatever the bridge has some people who stake for like $1 million or $1 billion, whatever. But let's say, assuming you're moving, there's more than $2 billion now of the Solana chain and only 500 million protecting this. People might say, oh, like we can just stop this and just keep it in there. So there's a lot of like trust in this bridges, and nobody really thinks about this because most of the time it works until it doesn't. Yeah. So most of the borders were open until COVID hit, and borders were closed suddenly, and people couldn't move anymore. And stuff.
As an example, and I won't ask you to raise your hand because technically you'll probably be violating some terms of service if you're a United States citizen. But if you're trying to move from non-Binance Smart Chain to Binance Smart Chain, you're probably using the Binance Bridge, which if you actually read their terms of service, you're technically not supposed to. And people go, wow, I just use a VPN. What's the big deal? It's a big deal until you can't use a VPN anymore. And then you're like, oh, frick, I have all my money here and I can't access it. I'm now relying on a third party for my value, which is antithesis to the entire point of blockchain. And it's a very scary thing. And people, again, it works until it doesn't. And I always kind of bring this up to a crowd because I'm shocked how many Americans have never heard of this. Executive Order 6102 in 1933, they made it illegal to own gold. And most people don't know this. They're like, what? In the land of the free, the home of the brave, it was illegal to own your own like chunk of gold you pulled out of the ground? Yes. And it was that way for many decades. So if something like that happens, like it did in China, and they make it illegal to own cryptocurrency, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to go to all the choke points, all the centralized exchanges, all the places that are permissioned and basically prevent you from owning your crypto. So this is why this stuff matters, because you're all doing well, you're making earnings, you're excited about it, and then if it all goes to zero, that's pretty frustrating.
Yeah, and let's imagine there's a bug. So assuming there's like whatever 1 million ether going into the bridge, but there are 2 million ether now suddenly on pick a chain. I don't want to be negative. Imagine now this bug becomes public, and now everybody will try to get out as fast as possible. And guess what? What happens after 1 million ether have been out of the bridge? There's no more ether coming. There's nobody not minting new ether for poor whatever lost ether on the other side. So really think about this. This is important. I know it sounds like, oh, who cares? But you care once you are the one who forgot or missed a bug report, and you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and suddenly all your money is gone.
You guys have heard of bank runs, right? You understand the whole concept of fractional reserve lending. I used to say this stuff, 5-10 years ago. People would be like, what's fractional reserve? Most people now have understood that your money's not actually in the bank. They're lending it out at 9-to-1, even worse than that ratios. So
now, I just want to go back now to actually the last point, which is like the zero knowledge rollups. And that's kind of like where I'm most excited about. So we talked about the economic mechanism where you can have like this optimistic way. If you misbehave, you get slashed. At the moment, it has a 7-day period for you to unlock your funds. That is a problem depends on your use case. Like if it's Ether or something else, it's not a problem because anyone can validate that the transactions were correct. So they don't need to be optimistic. They can just check it, and then they know it's okay. And so someone gives you liquidity on the other side, and they basically say, whatever, you need your USDC out. I give it to you at 99.9%, 9 cents to $1, and basically they take a small cut because it's risk-free for them. It's good for whoever who wants liquidity. So people have built solutions around this, but the more interesting one is instead of doing this computation, submitting it with the stake, what you do is you calculate with a technology called zero-knowledge proofs, which basically is math, which is magic, and I can't explain it, but basically what you achieve is the certainty that the computation was correct. So you have like your logic, which would be executed from like one computer is enough, which is more heavy. It can be one computer, like big cloud machine, does all the computation, and then it uploads just the results of the balances, or like the results of this, together with a proof. So it's more like a certified check. Yeah? So you know you have the money on your bank because the bank guarantees that you have it, because it's similar to cash, and you can do this. So here the analogy is maybe not perfect, but the core idea is that you upload this to Ethereum, and everyone can just see, oh, whatever, this 1,000 trades have happened, this is the results of like the netted results, and here's the proof. And so it's very hard to compute these proofs, but it's very, very cheap and efficient to validate the proofs. And that means you can have thousands and thousands of transactions, and people are now building even recursive ones. So you can have 1,000 and like 10 times, and you can put them into a proof over the proofs. So computation can be extremely compressed into something very, very tiny. And that's where we see with the zero-knowledge rollups that the more transactions you do in a short time, you have cheaper transaction costs. And that's like really like magical for like our scaling dilemma.
Yeah, this is exciting. If you caught what he said, is the more people that use it, the cheaper it gets, which is really phenomenal. You know,
Yes.
and the idea again that it's really, really, really easy to catch the bad guys, because it's really easy to validate that the calculation happened correctly. And if the reward is there to do it, in this case, you know, you don't even need the reward. You don't need the economic model. There's a zero trust model with this. But it is, I mean, I'm a computer scientist guy, and I've tried to understand ZK snarks and zero knowledge proofs and all that. It's definitely heady, complicated, like you said, magic math.
I think
it is real. There's lots of academic papers behind this. It's been around for how long now?
It's in the 70s.
Decades.
Like, the concept is out there since many years. I think only the last years the computational power was strong enough, plus a lot of innovation. So I think Zcash was the first blockchain which built it, and they used zero knowledge for privacy. So you have shielded transactions, so nobody can see sender, receiver, or amount, I think is faster now. Whilst this now is, you do the computation, and it's not about shielding the computation, it's about like compressing, because what you can say is like all these transactions we have validate they're all correct, and here's the proof that it's correct. So you have the integrity through this math. So here in this case, we need to trust that it's open source. There are many people are reading this paper, so it's maybe not anymore every average person or even experts. So it's a small number of people, but it's a research topic for many years. The good thing with Zcash, there was the first time that we suddenly have an economic incentive for people to research more. So now in the last, there was this article from one of the inventors of Starks, is this conversion explosion, like this massive explosion of like really, really great research. So within the last like years, there has been more published papers than I think in the decades before. And this combined now with lots of people, Starkware just raised 50 million, zkSync raised, like all of these companies have a lot of money to build really, really optimized tech around this. So there the trust is still required that people can validate the math and that the logic makes sense. But once we have, and we do this with many of the other primitives we have, but Starkware is using mainly hash. It's not even like fancy crypto. While it's the snarks, I know I'm getting a bit too technical, but yes, there's like different things out there. And that's
again, write this down: snarks, zk snarks, you know, zero knowledge proofs, optimistic rollups. Write it down, and then go do some research later, because this stuff really matters. And those who understand this stuff just like any investor, they make good investments because they understand what they're investing in. And a lot of people, unfortunately, in crypto are speculators. And the joke goes, you know who's skinny dipping once the tide goes out. You know, you and I, we've been how many bear markets? 3 major bear markets. Like we remember 120 to 50. You know, we remember 1100 to 250. We remember 20,000 to 3,300. Like when you're up here sitting at a stage like this and you've been through that, you're like, okay, I'm done with the BS. I want to know what's real. I want to know where I'm going to put my money, and it's going to be here in 10 years. And there are projects that you and I both know that are not around anymore. They're literally just not even a thing. Go look at the CoinMarketCap top 10, top 20. Some of those projects you've never heard of because they're not there anymore. If you go back far enough, 5, 10 years. So this stuff does matter, and it matters to your pocketbook, because if you don't educate yourself as an investor, you're going to be forever stuck in a speculator bracket, and you're not going to be making real money 5, 10, 15 years from now.
So I think what we will see now is like some of the projects out there's Starkware is doing a lot of work. They're launching by the end of the month, like they're
say that again.
Starkware. They're calling Starknet by the end of the year. The end of the month, and it's like one of these like zero knowledge rollups. ZK Sync is also very promising, and there are others. You
gotta say it slow because I want to write these things down.
ZK Sync.
ZK Circ.
Sync, like synchronizing. Sync.
Wait, say it again.
My German S. Synchronize. S. Sync.
Are you guys understanding? SYNCH? Sync?
Without the H, I think.
Without the sync. SYNC.
Yes.
SYNC. Okay.
Yes.
ZK
so
Sync?
Yes.
Excellent.
So then there's Hermes. Hermes was also like they're building what they call like a CK EVM. So EVM is the Ethereum virtual machine. It's basically like the computer which calculates all the smart contracts, and they want to build like a CK version of this. Without going into details, but Hermes is one of the projects which was really promising as well, and they got just acquired by Polygon, or acquired. It's like a token swap kind of model, where the Polygon network is now working with them. And I think 2 days ago they announced Milden or something, which one of the Facebook zero knowledge person has worked on this for 2 years, so he's not with Facebook anymore, he's also with Polygon. So there's a lot of like innovative, like really good people, and there's many more projects I haven't made. And just, I know we're maybe running out of time soon, but there's like 2 or 3 things you should really check out. So DYDX is one of the exchanges which is using the Starkware technology. It's one of these things, and if you try to use, or if you use it, the annoying thing is you need to put some ETH or something in there, which at the moment costs some money, which is like one transaction on Ethereum into this thing. But then it feels like a normal exchange. It's like super fast, super responsive. It's a very different experience than others. Like if you go to Uniswap or others and use Arbitrum or Optimism, which are the optimistic ones, feel also very fast. Like you click on it, it's cheaper. It's not like as cheap, but it's a very different experience, because the feedback this one server can give back to you is much more responsive. And what's really cool is also for NFTs. So Immutablex is the project which launched a few months ago. So they launched with the TikTok NFTs, which was like one of the first projects where it's kind of cool, and they do minting for free. So their business model is that because it's like this layer 2 things where you have other ways you can monetize it. So they pay gas fees, like Ethereum or Ether, basically for like anchoring it. But they make their money just from transactions on these NFTs. So their business model is very much more traditional Web 2, because you have now chances to compute on one computer or one server without trusting the server, because it's all provably correct on like on the main chain.
So you're in the Crypto Monday San Juan Telegram group, right?
Yes.
Okay. So as you said, there's a whole bunch more projects that you're aware of that we are not. So many more scaling solutions like exchanges, NFT platforms, where you're not paying the fees that we're all frustrated with. I would love for you to share those notes in there. So if you're not part of the Crypto Monday San Juan Telegram group, definitely talk to Isaac there. He's got his hand up. He can get you connected, or just search for it. You can find it. There's a whole bunch more we'd like to talk about. We should probably do this again sometime, because we could debate Waterfall.Foundation is a project that I'm involved in. We're doing post-blockchain technology, a DAG, a directed acyclical graph. All right, well, we could talk a little bit about that. We are just one among many solutions that are saying, okay, Layer 2 is cool, all this cool stuff is neat, but like is that really what we need? What about the billions of users coming to crypto and the billions of devices they're bringing? Will that even be enough? Do we need to solve this on layer one and then bring all that cool stuff and just put it on top? That's another potential solution. We've had a great, you, Sergey, and I had like a 3-hour awesome debate. I wish that was recorded because that was a lot of fun about this stuff. And you did acknowledge like that's a cool experiment. It should happen. That we should have post-blockchain technology experiments along with blockchain experiments. So again, waterfall.foundation, that's one you can check out as well. One of many different approaches that we can take to solving this problem because it is a big problem. Hopefully you got that. You understand that if all your crypto goes away because the government tells you you can't do it anymore, then that wasn't really crypto, was it? Right? It wasn't really a blockchain. So this is what we're trying to avoid, these trade-offs, and this is why I have such tremendous respect for Rouven and the leaders in this industry who care about these things. And they're like, yes, I know it's painful. Yes, I know it's expensive. Yes, I know it's frustrating. And yes, it's our fault. But we're going to solve it. And we're not going to make compromises along the way. That's one of the reasons why Bitcoin has been around for so long, and it's why it's done so well. Governments have tried to stop it, and they've failed. Media companies have tried to demonize it and tell you it's dead hundreds of times, and they've failed. The Bitcoin network is still here. Ethereum, these other solutions are still here. So we are running low on time.
I think you respond to one of your questions. ETH2 is not. So I think the terminology. So I think people are thinking about this much more modular now. So we have Ethereum 2 started with like a proof of stake blockchain, which is running since December last year. And so the initial idea was, okay, we start with this, and then we are like moving things into this new network. That's not anymore how this will work. What we will have is we have the proof of stake network, which is like the consensus network, and we have the execution network. And so that's basically the computation. And what we will do with the merge is we keep the proof of stake network running, and we will move basically the execution, like the computation stuff, and just point it not anymore from proof of work, but to proof of stake. So that's kind of the moment when both things come together again. We don't call it ETH2 because it implies that there's a new thing. It's the same Ethereum we have today. We just swap the consensus mechanism out there. And then over time, probably in a year from now, we will introduce shards for data because the rollups still want to put the data somewhere. And that's the next bottleneck, probably, that you will have like 64 data shards, and then there's more and more things coming on the roadmap.
I'm so glad you remember that, because that was a big thing that we teased out there in the beginning. And so if I understand you correctly, because I want to make sure I understand, there was this concept that you were going to like move your Ethereum to some other new thing, and you had to like lock it up and get these new Ethereum tokens and blah, blah, blah. Now it's more about, no, your MetaMask will still work the way it always does. Your Ethereum tools you use will work the way it always does. And all the cool, super smart people will, like, behind the scenes, fix all the stuff and make it not proof of work, but proof of stake as far as the consensus algorithm. But you won't care. It'll just work, and they won't have made any shortcuts or sacrifices in the things that matter. So is that a good summary?
Perfect. Any questions?
Do we have time for questions, Isaac? I know we've been going a while. We have time. Fantastic. All right, I see 3 hands up as well. And you got the mic. Isaac's
Hold
got
on,
the mic.
I got it. I got you.
All right, we got it.
Where at? Right here. Let's start up front.
2 questions. So just want to confirm, so sidechains like Polygon right now is as insecure as BSC, then I guess that's why they're acquiring Hermes.
So they do something special, which is like they're anchoring, they have certain commits to the Ethereum chain, but I'm not an expert enough about explaining the Polygon thing. But what they want is, like, Polygon's vision is much more, they build lots of toolings around this. So they have acquired the Hermes things. They're doing the sidechain, the rollups, and as well like the second, rollup concept. So they're building more like an ecosystem, and they're really like friendly with the Ethereum ecosystem. So I expect that maybe at some point the whole Polygon network or the current POS chain might use the Ethereum POS security. But I'm not 100% sure what the exact is.
Yeah, it seems that way. They're moving to roll up. And another question I have is regarding Cosmos and systems like Cosmos, where they do have bridge between the parachains and the relay chain. I guess that's not Cosmos, but it's similar model. So how does that work? Like what technology is behind that?
So the problem is with whether you have shared security or not. So I often compare this bit with like the United States have all these different states, and they have shared security. There's one US Army or one military force which is very strong, and then you have Europe, which has lots of different independent countries, and they have no shared army. They have like a lot of value, which is like very similar. So I compare this often like Cosmos is more like Europe, like they're all friendly and you can cross the bridges, everything is great, but they could still close the border. Like with COVID, we have seen this like last year, and similar, like since there's no enforcement mechanism that you can go. We have this on like the legal side, like you can go to the European like court to enforce certain things, but you don't have like the same level of security you have with like other models. And so Ethereum have this like one, and like all the layer 2s are maybe like the different like states, they're all protected by this one umbrella, and there's no like question asked of like, are you protected or not? It's a very different model. And then just to make this argument now, so then we have like maybe Solana more like a, I don't know, we're recorded like China, like it's very fresh, very fast, very efficient, it's great, but it has different properties, yeah? So it can move faster, it can change rules faster than democracies and other places can do, and that's a trade-off. Like I think, and we like many of these things, properties, because that's great for many of the things we're doing in a global world. But then when you want to have a place where your capital is long-term safe, people still move money out of countries into the United States, because it's where ultimately, if things go bad, you believe that the system we have here, democracy, the court system, and all of this will protect you best.
And another thing to think about when the bridging solutions is figuring out exactly how those bridges work. Because if you're trusting somebody to hold the real asset and they give you a wrapped asset or a version of that asset on another chain, is that a permission point that you're hoping you can get back out of again? And what I'm hearing tonight is there are mathematical ways to prove this without having to trust some entity that runs that bridge for you. So Cosmos and some of these other ones are interesting, but they're kind of within their own ecosystem. If you want to come outside that ecosystem, and I'm fans of Thorchain as well, they're doing some interesting things there where they have provability that you can come in with your own token, create a native Thor token, and do these liquidity things. But there was an issue recently with one of those bridges got hacked, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. So these things are important to understand how they actually work. And if that's too deep dive technical for yourself, then always find other people smart like Rouven to help you.
Could you talk about the Trilemma and Blockchain, and how the new Ethereum might probably compromise the decentralization issue?
So that's, I think, it's a very good. So people now say like, hey, we have now found a way to resolve this trilemma. Yeah. So the main thing here is that you can have a centralized server, or so Starknet and others will not be really centralized, but it will be a small 100 nodes which are moving around. So it's not anymore a risk of censorship resistance. And we didn't talk about this, but the main idea is that what you want is that highest security and decentralization on the back end. Basically on the highest level is the consensus mechanism, or the consensus which defines what is right and wrong. The Supreme Court needs to be this. So if now people can operate more specialized computers which can compute something, it's maybe the analogy. On a computer, we had a CPU, which is this general thing, and then now people started building GPUs. Your CPU is offloading things for your graphic card, but the results will come back to the CPU. So if you have now something where at least the system which keeps us all in check in terms of all the check and balances, the decentralization, can validate that whatever happened off-chain, in this centralized computers, was correct, you're not sacrificing this anymore. And that's kind of the magical scalability aspect while keeping decentralization and security alive.
And so again, I have to show a little bit the project that I'm working on with Waterfall, in that yes, and the more you can do that on layer one, the more you can have that scalability and this is why I think DAG technology is so interesting. And it's controversial. Some people academically are still not sure. And there's very many versions of DAG. There's transaction DAGs and block DAGs and this, that, and the other. But if you can actually do that in a provably secure way, all that cool stuff you're talking about, you get to bolt on top, and you get to make it even more performant.
And so my counter argument, just to make this point, is it's very hard to build a truly strongly decentralized consensus layer. It took years of like proof of work now, what Ethereum has like 5 or 6 years of proof of work, now to switch to proof of stake. Like if you're in a normal like new blockchain and you just have some VCs who are investing billions of dollars and you're like, then they own like 20% or the Web3 fund, like whatever, like people own a lot of tokens. And if you have then on-chain governance to decide what kind of changes we make, so it's tricky to really bootstrap a network today. I would suggest nobody do that. Pick any, like if you don't believe in Ethereum, then go to Polkadot or some other network where there is
innovation
already
will always happen though. You can't stop it. It's evolution.
Another question.
This is actually a two-part question. The first is, can you explain the difference between a layer 2 solution like Arbitrum and a sidechain like Polygon, and why you prefer a layer 2 solution? And the second is the goal down the line to be able to one day bridge from layer 2 to layer 1 seamlessly in a fraction of a second versus kind of the time it takes right now?
Yeah, good question. So let me not pick Polygon because that's the least let's say pick Binance Smart Chain or any other of the layer 2s, which they have their own security. So the main difference is Polygon has a proof of stake network. Binance Smart Chain, I'm not sure whether they're proof of authority or also proof of stake. XDAI is proof of authority. So these are basically like 100 picked projects. Yeah, that's authority. You just like know these are 100 actors and they're trusted, and so you believe in this. And that's fine. If it's just 20 and they're all picked by Binance, then it's your choice whether you trust it. Like there's no, it's a very subjective decision of whether you trust it or not. So the main difference of a sidechain is that you need to trust the security of their consensus mechanism. Whether it's the 20 nodes, the 100 nodes, proof of authority, proof of stake, whilst with layer 2s, you basically inherit the security of layer 1. So all this effort we have spent over the years to build really strong proof of stake with a really strongly decentralized network, we were running this now for 1 year just to see that everything is working perfectly. Now this is basically the security every of the layer 2 blockchain will inherit, because you always have the exit. You don't need to trust your local federal state court, because you can always go to Supreme Court.
Question on that though, with the sidechains, isn't the checksum block an idea where you could take this sidechain and then reattach it to the security of the L1?
So the problem there is like you can timestamp it, but then who's executing this? Like who do you call to say like, hey, there's this timestamp. What you need to do is you need to build up your own like network, maybe install your own like system, try to replay it. It's just super complicated, and this timestamping, what I think other sidechains are doing and Bitcoin and others are like all much weaker in their properties, that not within like maximum of 7 days or with CK within minutes, you have your assets. So it's not stuck for months, years or whatever. And there's, I mean, I don't, like there's so much more around like data. So that's just computation, but there's also like who stores the data, yada, yada. But yes.
Makes sense.
So
and then the second part was the transitioning from L1 to L2.
Yes.
Would that be instantaneous or close to it or not?
So that is a big challenge, because let's say maybe all these layer 2s will reduce the gas cost of layer 1 significantly, and we will see maybe a reduction of this gas cost. I think if at all, this is only temporary, because we will see more demand will creep up in this layer 2s, and so layer 2s will have many more transactions, and they want to put it on layer 1. So I think medium to long term, probably the cost on layer 1 will remain extremely high or high. So what we will see, and we started seeing this now with the first project, is that people are moving normal people don't need to go to layer 1 anymore. Like nobody here is using Swift, we use banks, or we use whatever, Visa and others. So in this case, it's a secured version of this, because you don't need to trust any company. What you will do is you will receive, like you just open a layer 2 account, and you can now receive it from blocked, like from your Coinbase to your layer 2s. And that's where Binance just announced, I think, to withdraw to CK Sync or to Arbitrum, like one of them. So this starts happening now.
And that's been the key thing we've been talking about. Is you can't work with the tools you use the most, such as centralized exchanges or DeFi or whatever, if you work with them directly at this L2.
Yeah.
Again, though, and we don't have time to go into this in detail, I get a little concerned because it starts to look like these hierarchies that are the industry I left. Whereas if you could stay on, like maybe it's post-blockchain tech that enables that high performance on layer one. I don't know. We'll find out.
Right. So I think there will be improvements on layer one all the time, and that's what people are working on. But the main thing is, not every of your court case goes to the Supreme Court, and the system still works because worst case you can go there. And I think that's where like people operate in their local environments or in their layer twos, and then bridging between the different layer twos are also like costs at the moment, but they're getting cheaper and cheaper the more volume are happening because you need to bridge much less.
I think Isaac's about to start playing the music to post off stage.
Well, we got one last question, and not a debate question, just a question, okay?
Yeah, so no debate question. So I just needed clarifications because I use, a lot of people use these terms interchangeably. They talk about Ethereum 2.0 and rollups, and I think that they use them interchangeably, but if I'm not mistaken, that's wrong, right?
Yes.
They're two completely different things, and so rollups like Arbitrum, that's a completely separate thing from Ethereum 2.0. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Okay.
So
okay, please.
yeah. So bottom line, like rollups work today. You don't need to vote for proof of stake or anything else. You can just basically roll them up to Ethereum, period. And with the merge, we will get the proof of stake network connected to the existing Ethereum network.
Perfect. So my question is, if you had to argue for one or the other, like in your eyes, do you see rollups like succeeding Ethereum 2.0 or vice versa? And like, what would be like your own just like your own opinion on that individually? So again,
I think the whole ecosystem has changed from like, is it rollups or Ethereum 2? I think it's more first step. We're doing rollups to Ethereum. That's what many people are doing now. There's lots of optimization. The second step will be that what Ethereum 2 promised was the shards. And we will first introduce data shards because rollups can really benefit from this. So we will have another 1000x, like at least 100x, I think maybe more, by introducing the data shards. And then maybe in like 2 or 3 years from now, there will be also like the sharded execution environments. So similar to like you have rollups rolling up into like this execution shard, and they roll up into the like consensus mechanism. So you will see, as we have this today, a much more hierarchical system where these like all play together. It's not one or the other. I think it's more like sequencing because these rollups work today, and shards, like many people have done shards, so it's like not. But we believe that. There are still some trade-offs people are making which are not good enough of the ultimate goals of decentralization security, and hence we have not deployed sharding yet. We prioritized rollups first.
Real quick, I just want to again thank you, Rouven, for coming out because, as you said, you're more of an introvert.
Yes.
Like being out here, you did a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the crowd; they're not all on their phones; they're watching you and listening to you. And I want to again give a huge shout out to the Boys and Girls Club. I've been on numerous calls with them. They're very excited about blockchain. We have an opportunity here in Puerto Rico, you may not realize, to create a new paradigm for the entire National Boys and Girls Club of America. They don't have blockchain programs within their educational systems. The more we as a community can support this local community of Boys and Girls Club, the better. It's a really exciting opportunity here. So please stop by and give some money to the kids. Again, if you're not sure what they're talking about, it's very simple. They're going to buy toys for kids who can't buy them, parents who can't buy toys for their kids for Christmas. It's a really great project. Pedro's been involved in this year after year.
Luke, am I correct that they just had their first educational program on blockchain? Correct?
They did, yes. Unfortunately, I missed it. I've been traveling a whole lot, but I've been on numerous calls with them. They're very excited to set up these programs to help the kids understand crypto and blockchain. And if you go and tell them, hey, that toy you got, that was actually like paid for by people in this crypto blockchain thing. That's a really cool story. It matters. So please, if you on your way out, just donate a bit. I think it's important. And also, again, think about the larger context of what we can do here in Puerto Rico for the entire Boys and Girls Club of America. When we get a program that's solid and works, you better believe they're going to be excited about it on a national level. And that's something pretty exciting for Puerto Rico.